We're very lucky today to have three panelists discuss the state of affairs, the state of Connecticut, the revenue situation, and you've all heard much about that, and undoubtedly it is going to have a drastic impact on the work you do every day. There's no question that the cutbacks are taking place. Many argue that they've been way too long in taking place, and those of you who are impacted are not going to agree with that. But a lot of us will be. Unfortunately, social services in general is the area to get cut. And I'm sure Department of Mental Health Addiction Services is reviewing what cuts will be impacting them, to what extent, and how that flows down to the trenches, to where we are every day, in combating the problem of opiates, heroin, and today's topic, marijuana. So we have three people with us. First, I'd like to introduce Greg Ordinaro, editor in the Hartford Business Journal. The Business Journal is the go-to source of business news in the greater Hartford area. In a recent editorial, Greg cited that legalizing recreational marijuana for revenue purposes was the wrong direction for Connecticut to go. Next to Greg, we have Art Linares, representing the 33rd District. Senator Linares is the youngest state senator, and additionally co-founded Green Skies, a successful Middletown-based solar energy company. Thank you for being here, Senator. And finally, we have Zach Jankowski, Director of External Affairs, Yankee Institute of Public Policy, which is one of the oldest state-based think tanks. Before becoming the Director of External Affairs, where he connects people and resources, he was the Institute's investigative reporter. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel today. I would like to start with Greg, and you have 10 to 15 minutes. The floor is yours, Greg.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. So I was brought here to talk a little bit about the editorial that I wrote, I think it was a couple of months ago. And the premise, as Rudy said, was that I don't think we should use an economic argument to legalize marijuana, recreational use of marijuana, and that we should first think about the social and public health ramifications before we just try to do a money grab because we're desperate for money. Obviously, one of the primary arguments that was being made in the legislature when they were considering the legalization bill is that it's going to bring in new revenues. There were some estimates as high as $50, $60 million. Of course, you take that with a grain of salt. Nationally, there are some numbers out there. There was about $1.2 billion in recreational marijuana sales in 2015, and about $4.5 billion in medical marijuana sales. So there is revenue being generated by this in other states. And there was also an argument that Connecticut needs to be the first New England state to legalize marijuana so that we get sort of corner the market before the rest of the states do and get the biggest bang for our buck on that. But again, my opinion is that we need a lot more research on what's the social public health ramifications of doing this before we just do it for a money grab. And there was some actually new data I think that was put out maybe this week that we're starting to get basically from states that have already legalized marijuana, what are the implications? And there was a study by AAA that said fatal crashes involving people who smoke marijuana doubled in Washington after they legalized the drug. 1 in 6 drivers who died in fatal crashes use marijuana. I think we need to get more statistics like this, what are the results and ramifications from other states before we go ahead with our own legalization. From an employer's perspective too, there's also a lot of concerns about marijuana laws. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty with how to treat people who use medical marijuana. The law isn't exactly clear. Connecticut employers can't legally fire somebody who is a medical marijuana user, but they can discipline someone who gets high at work or is under the influence. The problem is there's no legal precedent right now. We don't have great testing for marijuana, and also the term under the influence is very subjective, and there's going to be court cases about it eventually in Connecticut, I'm sure. Other states are starting to see some court cases brought up, but from an employer's perspective, there's a lot of liability issues with having people who smoke marijuana, especially if they're involved with heavy machinery and things like that. So from an employer's perspective, I think there's a lot of caution. And then in my editorial, I don't necessarily argue against completely shutting the door on legalizing marijuana. Personally, I'm against it. but I think, the social and political tea leaves are sort of changing on this issue. I'm mainly saying that we need more evidence for why we're doing it. And what, for example, if there's a criminal justice reform angle to this, I'm more apt to listen to that argument than just a strict money grab. Of course, that argument I think is also flawed. Governor Malloy has been trying to reform the criminal justice system, and he's trying to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana use, but he's against legalization because he said there's a difference between trying to help someone who has a conviction of marijuana on the record and trying to help their employability by sort of breaking this off as a major offense, and then there's a difference between that and sanctioning marijuana use, which I think as of right now, I agree with that issue. But again, I know the issue is going to be coming up for years now. The social and political tea leaves are changing. I just don't think it's the right time to do it just because we're desperate for new cash in the state.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Art Linares. I'm the state senator from the 33rd District, and I own and manage a small business called Green Skies Renewable Energy out of Middletown, Connecticut. We're a solar energy developer. We're in 19 states, and we have 75 people. The median age of our business is around 30, and so I'm very familiar with working with young people in the workplace, and have confronted this situation, marijuana in the workplace, and folks struggling with marijuana before. I just wanted to tell you briefly about myself. I've been in the legislature for 4 years now, and the first time I got in to the Senate, I was sworn in, and one of the older senators put his arm around me. He said, "Son, I have shoes older than you." And I said, "Well, maybe it's time for a new wardrobe." And so since then, I've tried to bring new ideas and work with other legislators across on the other side of the aisle in a bipartisan way. And actually, Representative Luxembourg, who's here today, has done an incredible job. We're on the opposite end of the aisle, but she's done an incredible job on this issue, and I wanted to thank her for all her work and inviting me here today. With that said, I just wanted to make a few points first about revenue, and then a few other points about the issues that I've seen with marijuana recently and throughout my life. From the revenue side, as a business person, when we look at revenue, we look at our return on investment. And as a business person, it's dollars and cents. And we're saying, okay, what's our cost? What's our return? What's our ROI? In government, you have to factor the cost, but you also have to factor the societal costs. And it's not just about making sure that we have revenue coming in the door for the state. It's about what are the costs to our society? How will it harm the future generations of our state? And so I say that because I think that really boils down to the crux of the issue here when we're talking about legalizing marijuana. I think because I was young, the folks in the Appropriations Committee thought that I was interested in the legalization of marijuana, so they reached out to me. They're pitching me on this possible bill legalizing marijuana. And they said it's going to create $50 million a year for the state of Connecticut. Isn't that great? And you think about it, in our state where we have approximately $300 million of Medicaid fraud a year, a lot of stuff that we can trim down to be more effective and actually save money. Why would we look first to legalizing something that we know is harmful to young people? It doesn't make sense, and it's not the right step from a revenue standpoint. It's not the right step from a policy standpoint, and I can tell you why. Because with that $50 million a year in revenue, we're going to see huge societal issues. We've seen the increase in heroin usage across the state. 700 people have overdosed from heroin this year alone. Lawrence Memorial Hospital had reached out to me. They said they had 5 overdoses in 5 hours. And if you talk to these people, they often start by using marijuana or alcohol at a very early age. And so the concern with the future use of heroin is a big problem. The cost as a society for medical, just hospitals, and all the additional costs that, when it comes to rehab and all the services that we need when people go down that path, it's not a step that we want to take. And as far as our economy goes, right now in Connecticut, our economy has grown at 0.5% GSP, and if you look at New York and Massachusetts, they're growing at approximately 2% a year. And so we're behind. We're behind in productivity, we're behind in economic growth. And I don't know who in their right mind thinks that more marijuana is going to help with productivity, And certainly in the workplace, Greg made an excellent point. If we legalize marijuana, there's no way for an employer to turn around and say, we don't want you to do that. We're seeing you slip in the workplace. You're less productive. And for a young person, I can tell you that there's so many young people that are trying to succeed. They're looking for every corner for opportunity. And if you smoke marijuana, you're going to be seconds slower. You're not going to be able to compete in this highly competitive workplace. And so, I stand in opposition to legalizing marijuana. And I have to tell you, I have some great colleagues in the Senate, some great colleagues in the House that do as well. And I think, from my perspective, if we really want to stop this, if we really want to prevent this from happening, we need to build a coalition of legislators that keep a binder in their desk in the chamber, and they say to their colleagues, if you bring that bill out, I'm going to take out that binder and I'm going to talk for 6 hours. And that's what we do. That's how, as a united front, we can stop bills like this from passing. And listen, I'm a politician. I can talk to you until the cows come home, but I'm gonna pass this on to Zach, and I really look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
This morning I spoke at my daughter's career day to her kindergarten class, and it was my first big success of the day was not mentioning marijuana to a bunch of 5-year-olds. I did not want to mix up my talks today. Hopefully I don't start talking to you like you're a bunch of kindergartners. So I'm a little bit more open-minded to the issue, to the idea of marijuana legalization. I haven't made up my mind yet. But I think that we need to make the decision based upon whether it's good policy. And I don't know yet. But what I can tell you is that legalizing marijuana for $50 million is not a good idea. $50 million will fund the state government for about 22 hours. We need to live with the consequences all year long. It's a very significant problem we have in this state, that we are making decisions based upon the amount of money we can spend because we made the decision, rather than saying, is this the right decision to make first? So I think policy should come first and spending should come second. We should adjust our spending habits based upon what revenue we can bring in with the appropriate good policies. I would love to win $50 million, be given $50 million, find $50 million. But it really isn't going to have the same effect for the state. The state has, I have this little chart. We're updating this chart, and so the new one will be out very soon. The state has 360 revenue sources, and the vast majority of them produce very little compared to the size of the state government. To really seriously have a revenue source for the state, you'd have to be talking in the billion-dollar range. We're still in the millions with legalizing marijuana. Especially given that with the budget that was approved by the Senate yesterday and then is going before the House probably today or in the wee hours of tomorrow, they're looking at $1.3 billion short in the following year and $1.8 billion, I think, in the following year after that. That's after they fix some of the problems. So we're dealing with things, this isn't even the right order of magnitude to solve the revenue problems that the state has. I would encourage you to take a look at a study just put out by the Tax Foundation on marijuana taxes. It goes very much into depth, but I'll just tell you a couple highlights. I think it came out, if not yesterday, it was very recent, and I'll just give you a couple highlights from it. One thing that I noticed from it is there's a slow buildup of revenue. There was, in the states that have legalized, the revenue projections ultimately, at least according to the Tax Foundation, ultimately came close, but it didn't come close in the first year because it takes time for this shift to happen. And then they were saying that another interesting point is that if you tax something high enough, it stays on the black market. And in contrast to where in tobacco, it was legal for a very long time, and then we started taxing it a lot. So we're kind of used to buying our cigarettes if we buy them at 7-Eleven. People who are currently buying marijuana are used to buying it through black market sources, so it's less of a change for them to stay where they are rather than to start paying the taxes. So some of the struggles that other states are having that have legalized is finding the right point of taxation to generate revenue without encouraging black market sales. Another important issue with a lot of these kind of unique sin tax type ways of raising revenue, other examples in Connecticut right now are the third casino or minimum bottle pricing, things like that. A lot of these are based upon monopoly approaches. So the reason why casinos raise lots of money is because you can't gamble everywhere. The reason why Colorado generates so much tax revenue from selling marijuana is because you can't buy marijuana legally everywhere. The Tax Foundation cited a statistic that 40% of marijuana sales in Colorado were from out-of-state visitors. So there could be a first mover advantage to this, but that's going to dwindle over time if many more states join up with this. And it just ultimately takes away a lot of the arguments, I think, for the revenue. And I'd just like to kind of close by saying I'm from an economics background, and I love thinking like an economist. And it's a lot of people have the misconception that economics is about math. And it's not. Economics is a way of thinking. I could go on about this forever, but I'll just give you like one quick summary of economics. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And this is a perfect example. Legalizing marijuana is not a solution, it's a trade-off. You're gonna fix some things and break other things. Just like banning marijuana. It fixes some things and breaks other things. So anytime that we make one of these decisions, we need to look at them with the negative side effects in mind as well as the positive ones. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. At this point, Kevin would like to make a comment.
I thought those were all really excellent remarks, so thank you. I think that one of the other things that we it's tempting is this issue of inevitability, because sometimes it feels like, I mean, even if you oppose it, there are, especially if you admit, which we do, that there is a lot of money to be made by a small number of business people who want to get very rich, that sort of can feel very overwhelming. And I think that we have to sort of zoom out a little bit and look at this issue sort of from a greater perspective. And there are a couple ways to look at that. One, the issue is now that this is an activity that less than 10% of people engage in once a month, that has convinced 50% of people. Let's say we're at a split 50-50. We actually don't know really what the true, depending on the poll questions, et cetera, but let's just imagine it's like a 50-50 split in the state in terms of whether we do this or not. The 10% have convinced 50% that this is a good idea. I think that is very sort of weak support, because what we see is that unlike alcohol prohibition, where this was 70% of people using alcohol and then it was banned, it's criminalizing 70% of people, essentially this is a very different activity. And what we're seeing in Colorado with the fact that 67% of cities have banned the sales of marijuana in Colorado because they don't want it in their communities is that when this becomes very real for people, like the actual, it's one thing to sort of talk about this from an academic point of view, but when it becomes the pot shop in your neighborhood selling the gummy bears to your kids and your kids' friends having accidental ingestion and overdose, absolutely, with these edible products, it becomes a lot more real. So I personally, even though I think that yes, some other states may go because these are very tempting solutions, and I like the way you put it, absolutely, everything is a trade-off, but they're put forward as solutions. I think we have to have a long view about this. I think the question is whether or not we want to sort of prevent this before it gets worse, or does it have to get a little bit worse before people kind of, have to see it right here to realize how bad it is. And I think it's also tempting. People like to link the issue with other progressive issues, other sort of civil rights issues, right? And I'm seeing a lot of nodding because I think this is happening, especially with something like gay marriage. Now, same-sex marriage, wherever you are on same-sex marriage, doesn't matter in terms of whether you're for or against it. The point is, we have to really push back on that about how different this issue is than something like same-sex marriage. And what I like to say to folks is, whether or not you agree that your kid's bus driver should be gay or get married or not, right, if they're gay, that the bus driver being in a same-sex marriage doesn't cause a car crash, doesn't cause an accident on the bus, okay? Whether or not you think it's immoral, right, for the state to say that, that's immaterial. We're talking not about a civil rights thing. We're talking about a public health and safety issue. And if your kid's bus driver is high, well, that matters in terms of the consequences versus whether they are Republican or Democrat, gay, straight, whatever. And so, it's very tempting, I think, for advocates to say this is inevitable, that this is kind of like, if you don't agree with this, you're with the, backward-thinking Neanderthals of the last century, essentially. And I think we absolutely have to push back on that. And also, by the way, remind people that still every single major medical association in this country has come down against this and said this is a bad idea for public health, and every single law enforcement organization has said this is a bad idea for public safety. And this is what happened in Vermont. I just can't keep, and Ohio, by the way, where Ohio, they said 73% were in favor of legalizing marijuana 6 months before the vote. That was the poll put out by the pro side. They said this is inevitable, and they knew they were going to get a lot of people who were against this say, well, all right, I guess, I don't really like it, but it's inevitable, so I guess we have to be okay. And what they did is they came together as a grassroots community. They were outspent 15-1 by, members of like 98 Degrees, the band. Nick Lachey was one of the $1 million investments who thought he could make money from this. A lot of other rich people in Ohio gave to this thinking they could make money. And they lost 2-1. They lost 66% voted no, 30-some% voted yes. Vermont also, as I said, was a huge win. The House overwhelmingly voted against this. So it's sometimes we can feel a little powerless, I think, and kind of like, well, Colorado's getting money and it's going to be hard to defeat it. I think we need to keep the issue in context and remember that if we actually do something, we won't have to wait 100 years for people to say, well, what were they thinking? We had to suffer. Because that's what we're saying about tobacco now. We knew about the link with lung cancer and tobacco in 1926. What were they thinking? We had to lose tens of millions of lives until 2000 for us to say, okay, we'll restrict this a little bit and move towards restrictions. So the question is whether we're going to have to wait that long to come around or whether we can prevent this, I think, from causing harm before it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I just want to offer an apology. I never even told you who I am or why I'm here.
Sorry, too.
My name is Rudy Marconi. I'm the first selectman in Ridgefield, and I've been in that position for 17 years now. And one of the consistencies that we, as chief elected officials, and I say we is because so many of us know what's going on in our communities, but so few of us are willing to take that step to bring it to the front page of our community. And that's what each one of you need to do when you go home. Write a letter to your chief elected official, tell them to pay attention, tell them to get involved with the various organizations around the state. Ask them to get involved with what you're doing to show support. And even if all they do is lend their voice to help you and support you in your efforts, the community will listen. Because as the chief elected official, the people have elected those individuals. They are the ones they know their voice, they want to hear from. So we're a very important missing link, I think, in this overall battle against drugs. And let me give you a little bit of how I was introduced to it. In '03, we had a 21-year-old young man just moved into his apartment, die of an overdose of heroin on Main Street. Now, little Ridgefield, beautiful little town, that doesn't happen there. It did. And it woke me up to the reality that, what the hell is going on? What are we not getting? What are we not doing that heroin, which when I was a kid, you read about in the Bowery, maybe seeing a picture of someone with a needle in their arm. No longer. It was right in our community. And it's in each and every one of your communities. No one's immune to this at all. It is a serious, serious issue. And what we did is we formed a group, a coalition. 13 years later, I can stand here on the 13th and say to you, we're still trying to figure it out. We'll run a couple of years, we'll have relatively few issues, and then all of a sudden, bam, you get hit. 1, 2, 3 kids dead. Automobile accidents, overdoses, God knows what killed them. But we need to address the issue. I see a lot of familiar faces here from our area, in the greater Danbury area, that spend a lot of hours on this problem. The last thing we need to have happen is our state of Connecticut, in an effort to incorrectly think that this is going to solve some of the budget woes in this state, to legalize marijuana. And as Kevin said, or someone else said this morning, it may not, I think it was Kevin, it may not be a result, heroin equals, is a result of smoking marijuana, but it's definitely a pathway. I think what I heard is that not everyone who smokes marijuana ends up a heroin addict, but just about everyone that's a heroin addict has smoked marijuana. It's a bad, bad move, and we need to pull together. We can no longer operate in silos. This problem is beginning to overtake all of us. And until we pull our groups together, until we focus and concentrate, and like the senator said, form a statewide coalition, a serious group that actually spends the time, the effort, and the money, we're going to lose this battle. Because, as Kevin just said, a lot of people are apathetic about it. They don't vote. As long as this problem is not contagious, let me tell you, I've said this to the Public Health Committee when I was testifying. If this was an issue where the CDC had just said that Ebola has now reached epidemic levels, our doors would be beaten down for us to provide a vaccine to fix it, and fix it damn quick. Yep, we have an epidemic level on prescription drugs. No one says anything. And it's because they feel they're not going to catch it. That's the problem of the individual that has a weak character, a weak personality, and it's their problem, let them fix it. And it isn't, and we all know that. It can strike any one of us at any time. And that's the sadness about all of this. And I just want to say one more thing, and then we'll go to questions. This is an excellent book. Dr. Kevin Hill is from McLean's Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts. And probably some of you have heard him speak, but he's been studying marijuana for 25 years. And the ultimate question I asked him is, I said, where do you come down on this? Are you pro or con? He said, I'm non-committal right now. But he said, I'll tell you one thing. It is a drug. And we have not done the clinical trials. We don't know what the long-range impact can be with the THC contents that we're dealing with today in the 35 to 40% levels. We don't know the ramifications. And until we, as a country, as a state, begin to study this issue and get the clinical information we need and distribute it through the normal resources rather than making exceptions and chasing the almighty dollar, only then will we begin to get a handle around this growing problem. So thank you all very much, and we'll now go to questions from the audience.
So I'm sitting here thinking about this, and I'm thinking, okay, so already we have very high acceptance and high use rates. And what is it that's really going to get the people of the state of Connecticut to vote this down when it comes up? I'm wondering if you look at a chart and you see, okay, Colorado use went up, this went up, this went up. What is it in Vermont? What is it that turned the people? Did they do some type of campaign? Does anybody out there know exactly what was the turning point for them?
So for those of you who may have not heard, the question is, what happened in Vermont? Why were they successful? Kevin?
Thank you.
Well, what happened in Vermont is that a group like this got together a year before they had the vote in the legislature. Now, thankfully, you're not going to be, I don't think, unless something changes, having a referendum anytime soon on this issue, which makes it so much harder to talk common sense because it's people with the money that get to drive referendum processes. Your process will be the legislature. And so, like Vermont, exactly like Vermont. And what we did there is we organized a year before. We had different work groups, different people got different major organizations in the state who were credible, physicians groups, law enforcement, business, insurance, on and on, to come together and have positions against this. And legislators in the House were, basically educated on this issue on a weekly basis, daily basis the last 2 months about why this was bad for Vermont. And every state will have different issues that drive the main points. Because, folks, the reality is we have too many arguments on our side. I think.
You have to distill it down to the most emotional.
You got it. Well, the most compelling ones. And that's why we're going to work with the governor's partnership, and we're going to be looking into polling on messaging. Because, what does move people on this issue? What we've seen in other states is it's the out-of-state big businesses that come in that people don't like. It's the neighborhood pot shops that are inevitably, if we legalize, going to be on their main street in their communities. And I've been to so many communities here in Connecticut, beautiful, sort of rural center main streets. I don't know, when people think about these now having the pot shops selling THC gummy bears, that convinces people a lot more than saying, in some states, a lot more than saying, trust me, marijuana is bad, and you shouldn't. People are like, well, maybe it is, maybe it's not, I'm not sure, but you talk about this in a couple of distilled messages, which we're going to get to, that's a process, and you repeat over and over, and you have a wide tent coalition. And we're going to do that here. That's why we're here today, is to kick that off, which means you guys are way ahead, frankly, than a lot of other states around the region who haven't had a chance to do that. Good.
Maybe we'll hear from the senator on this question.
Thanks so much, Rudy. And I think what happened in Vermont was you had this movement that had a lot of momentum to legalize marijuana and create this marketplace. The spike in the heroin epidemic may have spooked a lot of legislators from taking the plunge and voting for it, and so the bill died. That's the reality. Speaking from the perspective of a legislator, I can tell you that there's a couple kinds of constituencies, but when talking about the legalization that wants their legislators to vote for legalization, they're louder than they are large. And so there's not as many voters, quite frankly, that want this, but they're loud about it. They're passionate about it. And they're going to get out there, they're going to ask you where you stand on legalization. And so I think my plea to you would be, let's be loud and let's be large. Let's turn our anger into activity, our frustration into activity, our passion into activity. And the way we do that, in my opinion, is I think the best way to do that is to, during an election cycle, reach out to your legislators, reach out to the candidates, and say, are you willing to sign this pledge that you won't vote to legalize marijuana? Are you willing to stroke a signature saying that you're committed to this challenge? And if you are, we're going to support you. We're going to knock on doors for you. We're going to work for you because this is important. We're passionate about it. And I think that's how you affect change, specifically here. And I just want to leave you with one more point. I represent some terrific small towns, the kind of towns that they just mentioned with small main streets, and some of these towns have been named the best small towns in America. Essex, Old Saybrook, and in some of these small towns we've seen heroin overdoses. And so I decided to hold community forums. And in the town of Old Saybrook, one of the wealthiest towns in America, there was standing room only for parents that were so concerned for acceptance. We need our politicians to say, we're going to stop this. We should stand for equal opportunity in education. We should stand to make sure that everyone has a chance to succeed in this state and they have access to all the opportunities in the world, not taking a step in the wrong direction for the future. And so I think we need to really ask politicians to tell us where they are. And if bills do come my way, I can tell you that I have friends in the Senate. We're going to filibuster them. We're going to talk it all day long, and they're never going to be able to get it passed. But we need a lot of legislators like that.
Here's another statistic in our town. Between December and March of this year, we had 6 expulsions in the high school for drugs.
I'm Dr. Jeffrey Cameron from Yukon. I've been in the field of addiction for more than 25 years. You most probably know the adage, what we've learned from history is that we never learn from history. If you look at the last 30 or 40 years, you will see there were all kind of waves of waxing and waning of use of drugs. But here's the deal right now. We have a perfect storm. Marijuana use has continued to climb steadily since 2007 among our youth. By the way, the only drug that's continued to climb. But we are getting back to the 80s, 12 to 13 per 100,000. We also have a heroin epidemic, and we are trying to recover from an economic crisis. And all of it together affects our people. Now, politicians are very opportunistic, and I don't trust politicians, unfortunately. I've never seen a politician who ever resigned from his position. The bottom line is, even though I'm not a voter for the Tea Party, we can learn something for the Tea Party strategy. I think that family is the highest power in this country and any other country. I would like families and parents to say to the legislators, if you vote for legalization, you go and get a real job. And I'm preaching it every community because I give talks almost every other week on marijuana. By the way, I do weddings and bar mitzvahs. So if you can come to my presentation next week, I'm at the clearinghouse of Wheeler Clinic. I have 2 hours to talk about this issue. So the bottom line is, I think that the term utilitarian approach, what's best for the community, was invented in the United States in the 18th century. And the rights of the individual that a lot of people waive come first of all from the rights of the community. So first of all, we need to ask what's good for our community in order to be able to honor liberty, justice for all. And what's happening right now is marijuana, given the fact that we are working with adolescent substance abusers, we are very concerned about what we see and what's going on. All the kids we've been treating, and we actually in the last 20 years, we reached out to 1,500 adolescents. We conducted the largest study in the world at Yukon on 600 adolescents with cannabis use disorders. All of them believe they can drive under the influence without a problem. All of them believe they're invincible because that's what it is to be an adolescent, right? You're very narcissistic and you can do whatever you want. So the bottom line, to deal with the politicians, tell them, if you don't, as you mentioned, even stronger than that, if you don't vote against, go get a new job, and I think that we can do it.
Yeah. Thank you, and I'd just like to put an exclamation point at the end of that and what the senator said. This fall is the election cycle for your state senators and your state representatives. First of all, if you don't know who they are, you should. Go find out. And second of all, I'll call on Jill to ask her to put together a petition that we can bring to our elected officials at the state senators and the state representatives to get them to sign this. I think that type of a coordinated effort may have an impact in Hartford. So who else had a question?
Question for our state senators. I appreciated your comments about the $50 million of revenue in perspective. You can see at the Capitol, do people look at that $50 million and see it as a pure portions, not even to mention the outpatient and residential treatment that are going to be a result of it? How common is looking at related costs to them?
Well, so on this particular issue, I'm not certain exactly how they're weighing. I can't get into their heads quite that well. But I can say that oftentimes lawmakers make plans to dedicate money to certain things, to use it for specific purposes, and then reality intervenes. I mean, for example, you probably heard about the transportation lockbox. This is just this concept, you know, that the state collects a bunch of money from you when you go to the DMV and when you buy gas, and it's supposed to be used for roads. And it could be used for roads if we just chose to do it that way, but we don't. So now what we're doing is we're recognizing that we don't have the willpower to do that. So we're going to pass a constitutional rule that requires us to spend the road money on roads. Long way of saying that they don't have a lot of discipline when it comes to, like, if they were to say, here's $50 million from legalizing marijuana, let's use that $50 million to deal with the consequences of legalizing marijuana, or some portion of that. They don't have a lot of discipline to stick to that plan once they start down that path. And they haven't quite looked in the couch cushions yet, but any bank account at the state level that has money in it, I mean, the Yukon Health Center malpractice fund has been swept for money on numerous occasions. Just one example of just any bank account that carries a balance, they'll take it out. So it just shows that it's a lot of short-term thinking, penny wise, pound foolish. So I really don't think I don't have a lot of confidence they're thinking through the consequences.
And even on related costs?
The question is related costs associated with the
So
legalization.
it's not going to be $50 million. It's
Right.
going to be $50 million minus the cost of running the program.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, our legislator doesn't have a great track history of doing budget estimating too well. So I don't know where that $50 million is coming from. My guess is that, you know, whoever is pushing the bill is going to shoot for the highest stars in terms of what it could actually bring in. So maybe an option would be, you know, doing your own analysis to try to get numbers out there of what it could actually bring in. But yeah, and I'm sure that $50 million does not include what it costs to regulate it and things like that. But if you're a proponent of the bill, you're not gonna put that out there. But my guess would be $50 million is probably a pretty significant offshoot of what action might be brought in, especially early on.
But I just gonna say, it doesn't really matter. But if it's $50 million minus $25 million or $50 million plus 25, it's still. I mean, if you have your household budget, this is like you getting $250. Like, it's not going to change your life. It's not going to change. You might go out to dinner one extra time, but really, it's going to get lost in the bills you're paying, things you're doing. Kids get an extra candy bar on the way home from the store, but it isn't going to really impact it. So I think that it's sometimes hard for us to think that $50 million is a small amount of money, but from the state's perspective, it is. So it really shouldn't be a selling point. We can round that down to zero and just call it a day.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they get $50 million from. Maybe they expect the sales of Doritos to go up once they legalize marijuana. But Mark Twain said, "No man's life, family, or property is safe when the legislature's in session." And I think Greg made an excellent point that even if there's $50 million coming in from revenue, or we're looking at billion-dollar deficits. So to say, oh, we're going to send that to education, that money would be swept anyway. But to the point of how they factor the costs, your question was, do they factor in the societal costs and the burdens created from legalizing? And the answer is no, they don't. It's simple arithmetic. They're just saying, if we tax it, this is how much revenue will come in. They're not taking into account the burdens on society, and they should be, because I think it would be very detrimental.
You know, just one addition to that, I was very involved in the anti-casino effort 10, 12 years ago. And when we began studying that issue, we looked at North Stonington as a community right next door to a casino. And what happened to that community, some of you may already be aware of it, it sucked the economic life out of that community and has changed it forever. That's a negative that is very difficult to measure. And what we're talking about here is truly a quality of life. We're worried about losing our young people because of jobs. We're not going to only lose them about jobs, but the people that are left here are going to be the ones too lazy to work or not care about working because of the smoking that'll be going on. It will have a negative impact on our workforce. Those are the kinds of things I think the legislature really needs to begin looking at. Study the casinos, see what they do. Bridgeport argued that if they got a casino, it would mean the world of difference to them economically because the city was in such difficult, and still is, difficult way economically. I was on a TV show and I argued, well, take a look at Atlantic City. You can go 1 block away from the casino and there's absolute poverty. A casino does not bring good times. Only for those who have the money to spend, and definitely for those who own the places to collect all the money that is spent. I see this marijuana issue, exactly the same thing. You have a few people, as Kevin said, that have the money to invest, and they're pushing big marijuana now. And they're convincing our legislators with campaign contributions, etc. It goes on. It went on in Ohio. It's going to go on in Connecticut. We need to stop this soon. Kelly would like to say a word.
Thank you. Sure, hold on.
I would like to introduce Kelly Luxembourg. Not only is she one of our key staff members at the Governance Prevention Partnership, but she also is a state representative. So when she won her election last year, 2 years ago, we had a lot of talk at the organization on which hat is she going to be wearing doing which work. So it's a real pleasure to be working with Kelly. We benefit in so many ways by having her with us. As Art mentioned already, she was responsible for getting him here today. And I think that we will have success with reaching other legislators by building this kind of support. So Kelly, thank you very much. I know you have something to add with your legislator hat.
I do. So I'm taking off my partnership hat for a second, and I'm going to put on my legislative hat. I guess maybe I'll sway between the two because often it's hard to only wear one. But when this conversation came up in our office as a youth prevention organization back in the fall, you know, it made natural sense for us that we were definitely going to, we could not support the legalization of marijuana, even though the way the legislation was written was that it was for youth who were over the age of 20, or for people who were over the age of 21. And so it caused a moment of pause for me, realizing that, okay, so I'm a legislator and this issue is going to affect the place that I'm working, and so what am I going to do? And so I've heard the thing, like marijuana is no big deal. We have more youth who, from urban areas, who are in jails and getting arrested because of marijuana use, that this is going to generate $50, $100 million in projected revenue for the state of Connecticut. And to me, it all seems great. As a relatively uneducated person on this issue, I will say I'm not in our prevention area, I'm in our fund development area, so I'm not a prevention expert by any means, but then I feel like for you here today, I'm your perfect test subject. So 4 months ago, if you had asked me where I would have been on this, and I was actually approached to co-sponsor this piece of legislation, I would have said, well, I can't co-sponsor it given, you know, where I work and what I do, but, you know, I would think maybe eventually I would support it. But it's the information that I've gotten over the last 3 months, studying this from the health effects, the revenue pieces. I know Rudy was just talking about, you know, we liken this to the alcohol industry and regulating there. Do you know that for every drink that is consumed in the United States, that it costs $1.90 in societal costs? So nationally, it's a $223 billion cost to society for alcohol. In addition, for employers, 500 million days are lost. Work days are lost from alcoholism in this country. So what's going to happen if marijuana is legalized? It's a slippery slope. But I wanted to come and tell you, and I was texting Jill, I'm like, do you think I should do this? But I really felt strongly that, you know, you can make a difference coming forward, talking to your legislator. Here in Connecticut, one of the great things is we have the Citizens Election Program. So you're not going to see big money flowing into us as individual candidates. So you're not going to see the same kind of, I don't think Colorado does have that kind of program. So there is like big money going into those elections, but we've prevented that here in Connecticut. So it's contributions that are between $5 and $100 for every legislator that you support or don't support who gets a fund from the state. So I just wanted to share that with you today, and I thank so much everyone who's been on the panel and is sharing their thoughts and viewpoints. But the work that you're doing really does matter and can make a difference.
If I heard the panelists correctly, the two of you are ambivalent or not yet firm on one side or the other of the issue. Is that, am I correct?
I'd say I'm against it.
What would it take? What would it take? What do you think it would take for you, the two of you who are ambivalent, or to be affirmative, that is, to oppose the legalization of marijuana in Connecticut? What would it take for you to make that shift?
I feel a little bit like Phil Donahue.
Thank you, Rudy. So just to be clear, the Yankee Institute would not take a position. So my employer would not have a position one way or the other on this particular issue. And me personally, the way it's all about the details. I mean, and that's kind of, I'd be open to looking at any proposal. I don't know what the proposal that would convince me would look like to support it. So I'd at least give it a open hearing. I guess the way I would put it is I'm not a definite no to legalization, but I haven't imagined yet what would get me to yes. So I'm probably more friendly than I made myself sound like to what you guys are thinking, but again, I think it really gets down to the details of, there's so many different ways, like, is legalization, is it really some sort of a decriminalization form? And there's many different layers to it, and there's a lot of different approaches to doing it. So I guess I'm open to hearing people's suggestions, but I haven't found one that convinces me yet.
Here's a start. Any other questions? Really, no other questions? Is that it? Kevin, any closing comments at all? Again, I just want to reemphasize that petition.
Yes,
We really need to stay focused,
Yes.
and we need some actionable items. To sit in rooms like this and debate the issue, talk about the benefits, the negatives, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, until we put an action plan together, pull together as a group, get out of our silos, that is when we'll begin to have impact. And if you seriously want to have impact on this issue, stay tuned, because we're going to need your help. Thank you all very, very much.